MP Poilievre.
Minister Duclos, your mandate letter from the Prime Minister instructed you to, quote, lead the development of a Canadian poverty reduction strategy that sets targets to reduce poverty and measure and publicly report on our progress. To repeat, you are charged to measure and publicly report on progress on poverty. Your department created the market basket measure. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Stats Canada says it is a measure of low income based on the cost of specified basket of goods and services representing a modest, basic standard of living. Can you tell me if food, shelter, transportation are included in the market basket needed for a basic standard of living?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm delighted for the occasion to link my former life with my current privilege of being with you today. In my former life,
in either of those two lives, were you able to learn whether food, shelter, or transportation are included in the market basket measure?
What I'm going to do, with your permission, is to signal first that the poverty reduction strategy that the Canadian government is currently
So I can help you then. It is all three, in fact, are included in the market basket measure. A Finance Canada briefing in 2015 suggested a carbon tax would create a cascading effect of higher prices on these very items. How much will a $50 a ton carbon tax increase the cost of a market basket measure that your department says is needed for a basic living?
I'll switch in French because I have a very interesting quotation making precisely those linkages between the importance of building a sustainable economy, both from a economic perspective and from
Does your department have any estimation of the increased costs of a market basket for an average family as a result of a $50 a ton carbon tax? Does that analysis exist within your department?
I'm not sure how this department, how this committee works, but normally when we ask questions, we normally listen to the answers, and I'm very willing and
we're not getting any so
feeling
far.
privileged to provide such
answers. Point of order here, Dan.
It would be nice if you actually allowed the minister to answer the question and not interrupt him.
I would concur with that, Pierre. If we could maybe let the minister actually get to his answer, that would be appreciated, please.
So I'll get to the answer you are looking for, but I think I should also get to the answer that we are all looking for when we look at the impact of the importance of building our economy in a sustainable manner. My quote here comes from Cenovus Energy.
Cenovus supports carbon tariffs. Carbon tariffs are one of the most equitable means and the most effective means of promoting innovation in order to reduce GHG emissions.
Pricing carbon pollution, we must be looking for ways that are both efficient
With
and
respect,
equitable.
Mr. Chair, we have allowed the minister to go on at length. The question was the impact of a $50 a ton carbon tax on a basic market basket of goods people need for a living, and he's come back with a quote from a CEO of a multinational oil and gas company, which is very interesting, but not terribly interesting to people who are struggling to purchase a market basket of goods they need to survive. There's no surprise that a CEO of Cenovus can pay the carbon tax. I'm asking about poverty, which you were tasked to address in the mandate letter you received from the Prime Minister. So, for the third time, can you tell us what will be the increase in the market basket cost for a family once the imposition of a $50 a ton carbon tax is complete?
Ian, if you were to join my former life with my current life, you will also make the connection between a policy that need to be both equitable and effective in sending the right signals to our businesses and workers, as well as protecting the welfare of our more vulnerable Canadians.
So you don't have an answer to the question.
You've seen in recent months exactly what type of policies these can be. the CCB and the cut in middle class taxes have been arranged through increases in the taxes that we're asking high-income Canadians to make, and decreases in the family benefits we were sending to families of millionaires.
Speaking of Mr. Chair, the question was about the carbon tax. He's now talking about child care benefits. Speaking of the low-income cutoff line, which is what you've used to make your claims about reduced poverty for children, Statistics Canada's officials testified here that cost increases for things like food, fuel, and electricity would necessarily increase the number of people below the low-income cutoff line. How many additional Canadians will fall below the low-income cutoff line, that is the poverty line, as a result of increased costs from your carbon tax?
About 30 seconds, sir.
I would frame the question differently. I would say, how many low-income Canadians will be lifted out of poverty because of the resources that provinces and territories will receive from taxing a bad thing, which is carbon pollution, and handing out support to families of middle class and lower income Canadians. So how many of these Canadian families will be lifted out of poverty because provinces and territories will have more resources to do so?
Excuse me. First, that's time. Second, we have a point of order from Mark Warwa.
Thank you, Chair. I think this meeting, and I do appreciate ministers being here to answer questions, but if they answer the questions, I think this meeting will run a lot more effectively and efficiently. For a minister to not answer questions is a disservice to this committee.
I don't disagree with that at all. I'd also like all the committee members to be listening to the answers and not interrupting the ministers as well. In conjunction with that, we could all do better. Now we're over to Mr. Rumi, please.
Connection to a Cayman Islands tax evasion scheme. He said, and I quote, Stephen Bronfman had no other direct or indirect involvement whatsoever with the Colbert Trust, that trust being located in the Cayman Islands. We now know that that connection came in the form of a $7 million loan that was still in place as of 2005. Does the Prime Minister still believe that Mr. Bronfman has no connection to this trust?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Our government is aware of the fact that this is an issue of billions of dollars, and we've invested nearly $1 billion over the last 2 years. The agency is using the information it received through lists that were disclosed via its international partners through the BEPS program. We're talking about more than 37 partners. That's why the agency has more than 990 investigations, 42 criminal investigations linked to financial structures abroad, which were ongoing as of September 30th. We're looking at links with Canadian entities, and we are going to take appropriate measures.
When the original revelations about Stephen Bronfman's connections to a Cayman Islands tax haven came to light earlier this month, the Prime Minister said, quote, "We have received assurances that all rules were followed, and we are satisfied with those assurances." Is the Prime Minister still satisfied with the assurances that his top fundraiser followed all of the rules?
The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, his accusations are completely ridiculous. No one is above the law. No one is interfering in the agency's investigations, and the law applies to everyone. No one is above the law.
Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, I think I just heard the minister say that these allegations are completely ridiculous. Her job is to ensure that her department conducts these investigations totally objectively. But she has now predetermined the outcome by declaring that the allegations are ridiculous. Mr. Speaker, how can Canadians have any assurance that there will be an honest investigation into Mr. Bronfman when both the Prime Minister and the Minister have declared him not guilty?
The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, contrary to the previous government, when a former Minister for National Revenue, Mr. Jean-Pierre Blackburn, publicly said that the Conservative government did not make this a priority, whereas for us, it is a priority. We've invested nearly $1 billion. I have already said, I will repeat, and I thought it was very clear what I said in French. Nobody is interfering in the agency's audits.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has not retracted her comment. She seemed to suggest in her earlier answer that the allegations were completely ridiculous. Well, Mr. Speaker, those allegations have not even been investigated yet by her department. We have new revelations from the Paradise Papers suggesting a link between Mr. Bronfman and this potentially illegal tax haven. How could the minister possibly think it appropriate for her to stand and exonerate him before her department has even had a chance to conduct this investigation?
The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, no one is above the law, and my colleague knows very well that I cannot comment any individual case on the 30 million people that the 30 million people who produce an income tax statement.
Order. Alors, l'honorable ministre de National.
The Honourable Minister for National Revenue has the floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand that this is a hot topic for our colleagues on the other side, given that it was not a priority for them under the former government to deal with tax evasion, that is, whereas we have decided that it is a priority and we've invested $1 billion. We're looking at 4 jurisdictions per year. We have criminal investigations ongoing.
Mr. Speaker, I'm looking for an assurance here. Will the minister assure Canadians that neither she nor the Prime Minister will stand in the way of an investigation by her department into Mr. Bronfman?
The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, it will be my pleasure to reassure my colleague on the other side and to repeat that no one is above the law and that no one, as I have said, no one will interfere in the investigations and audits led by the Canada Revenue Agency. I hope that my colleague is reassured.
When it was revealed that the Prime Minister had brought a convicted terrorist along on his trip, he claimed that it was a backbench MP who had arranged it. Now he claims that it was the Indian government that did it through a conspiracy. Is he alleging that his own backbench MP is part of a conspiracy orchestrated by the Indian government?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've already answered that question. However, I understand that the opposition wants to keep this line of questioning because they prefer talking about anything other than Budget 2018, which includes so many positive initiatives for the middle class and those working hard to join it. One of these is the Canada Workers Benefit, which we are not only strengthening, but we are also making accessible to an additional 300,000 low-income workers. The opposition will stay focused on us, but we will continue to focus on Canadians.
Order. 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 As I said earlier, members don't have confidence in the public to make decisions and assessments about things that are said in this place and the questions and the answers and the quality thereof. Members ought to understand that the Speaker is not empowered to comment on any of those things. Members should listen. The Honourable Member for Carleton.
The Prime Minister wants to talk about the budget. So in what year will it be balanced?
Hey. Member for Carleton.
For the Finance Minister, today in the Finance Committee, government officials admitted they have modeled the cost of the carbon tax to Canadian families. There you go. But then when I asked if they would just share those calculations with the committee and with the people who will have to pay those taxes, the officials said he cannot do that at this time. So what the government wants is for Canadians to write a blank check wherein the amounts will be written after that check is in the hands of the government. Why won't the finance minister end his carbon tax cover-up and tell us what this tax would cost Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
That the member opposite didn't read the report that was released yesterday. Clear evidence that what? Putting a price on pollution works. And it also, you can do that while growing a clean economy. We make decisions based on evidence. But I've got a question for the member opposite. What would his party do to tackle climate change? Do they even believe it's real? Because they have no plan.
Hear, hear. Order. The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that the finance minister is still in hiding and can't answer questions about his own budget. But we'll find out if there's anyone over there who can answer this question. Today, gas prices in Vancouver have reached a record $1.60. Consumers are suffering. Families are paying more, and it's going to get a lot worse under this proposed Liberal carbon tax. The government knows how much this tax will cost families. Why won't they tell Canadians how much will it cost the average family?
The Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I wish the member opposite wouldn't mislead people from British Columbia. If he understood economics, he'd understand why the price is higher for gas in BC. It actually has to do with the supply and demand issue. It has to do with exchange rates. We understand that polluting is not free. There is a real cost on Canadians, and I wish he could tell all the kids that are watching Question Period right now what he would do to ensure a more sustainable future for them.
Hear, hear. Member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it might be a lot more sustainable if they would let us, as Canadians, build a pipeline to bring our own petroleum to its market. But back to the matter at hand, there is no question that this carbon tax will raise the price of gasoline. The minister's own document says that it will go up by at least 11 cents, and that's if you believe their numbers. They also know how much this tax will cost the average Canadian family, but nobody will answer over there. Why won't they end this cover-up and tell us how much this tax will cost?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Speaker, I'm happy after Question Period to hand over our analysis that shows that carbon pricing works, and you can do it while growing the economy. 80% of Canadians live in a province, Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec, where there's a price on pollution. And guess what? Their economies were the fastest growing in the country. Once again, I asked the member opposite, what are you going to do? Under 10 years of the Harper government, you did nothing.
Order. I remind the Honourable Minister of Environment to direct her comments to the Chair. When we say you in here, we're talking about the Speaker, of course. Honourable Member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the Environment Minister can't answer the question about how much this tax will cost Canadians. The Finance Minister won't answer the question about how much this will cost Canadians. The Prime Minister was unable to answer the question. So I'm trying to figure out which of these ministers has the answer. Why don't we just ask them all? How much? How much? How much? How much? How much? How much? How much will this carbon tax cost Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Environment.
I have a question.
Order.
What's your climate plan? What's your climate plan? What's your climate plan? What's your climate plan?
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, she should know because she actually followed the Conservative targets on climate change. We actually saw greenhouse gas prices go down at the same time as taxes went down under the previous Conservative government. We save people money while protecting the economy. Now, will they finally answer the question, how much will a Canadian family have to pay for this new Liberal carbon tax?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I wish that the party opposite would understand the cost of climate change right now. One of the hardest calls I ever had to do was to a rancher in Alberta, whose whole ranch burned down because of forest fires. There are people that are suffering from floods across the country. The Arctic is literally thawing, and they think it's a joke.
Order. I have no trouble hearing the question. We also need to hear the answer. Order. I'd ask my members for Kitchener-Conestoga and others, not to speak until it's their turn to speak. The Honourable Minister of Environment has the floor. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a real cost of climate change right now, and Canadians across the country are feeling it. That we have people that are fearing the impacts of forest fires, of floods, of droughts. The Arctic is literally melting, but they think it's a joke. No, we are taking serious action on climate change. We have a plan, and we have a target, and we're going to meet it.
Member for Carleton.
Actually, they just released a document yesterday saying they won't meet their plan. They say they won't meet their target. They'll come about 90 million tons short of meeting their target, and that's with their carbon tax. She said she spoke to a rancher in Alberta. Did she tell that rancher how much this carbon tax would cost him and his family?
Minister of Environment.
How I can make it more clear. Maybe the member opposite could go call the insurance companies, because insurance companies tell me every day the huge payouts that they're having to pay because of the cost of climate change. Let me also talk about the opportunity, the $23 trillion opportunity, as Mark Carney, the governor of Bank of England, has called it, of clean growth. This party doesn't understand that we need to protect our environment and grow in our economy. We're going to do both. They will do neither.
Honorable Député de Bellon.
The Prime Minister has a budget bill before the House of Commons right now that Finance Canada admits will raise the price of gas, home heating, and most other consumer goods that Canadians buy. How much will the Prime Minister's carbon tax cost the average Canadian family?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for 10 years, Stephen Harper and his Conservatives did nothing on protecting the environment. However, over those years, a number of provinces stepped up and put forward price on carbon pollution. And actually, we have now, presently, a situation in which 80% of our economy, 80% of our citizens live in jurisdictions where there is a carbon price in effect. So we are continuing to move forward to demonstrate that a national price on carbon will be fair for those provinces who already have it and grow the economy for everyone.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the provinces were already doing it, the Prime Minister would not have to introduce a budget bill forcing them to do it. Clearly, this is a federally imposed tax. And clearly, he would have read the briefing notes that his departments have given him about the cost of that tax. He knows the cost, so I ask again, how much will this Liberal carbon tax imposed by this Prime Minister cost the average Canadian family?
Simple. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to have to correct the member opposite, but in fact, it is during his government that many provinces moved forward on pricing carbon pollution. We have a situation in which British Columbia, Alberta, Quebec, and Ontario have all moved forward with pricing of carbon pollution, and we know that it has to be done right across the country. That's exactly what we are ensuring, but we're working with the provinces to ensure that they can put forward a model that works for them, as long as it is fairly stringent and impactful right across the country.
I'm having difficulty hearing the answers. I'd like to ask Mr. St. Albert, Edmonton, and others not to be yelling when someone else has the floor. It's very straightforward. The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, the Prime Minister uses the word stringent. There's no doubt that it will have a stringent effect on household budgets. There's also no doubt the Prime Minister supports high gas prices. He said so when he was out in Vancouver celebrating $1.60 a litre gas prices. There's also no doubt that his carbon tax will raise the price of consumer goods that middle-class Canadians rely upon. It's his bill. So how much will his carbon tax cost the average Canadian family?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the years of the Harper Conservatives, we work with provinces as we move forward on pan-Canadian issues and projects. That's why we are working with provinces like Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and others to establish how they want to move forward on putting a price on pollution. We know we need a price on pollution across the country. It needs to be equivalent and effective right across the country, but every jurisdiction will get to determine how that money comes in and how they return that money to the people who need it.
The honourable member for Carleton.
We have no doubt that this Prime Minister will work with any politician as part of his plan to raise taxes on Canadians. It's his form of trickle-down economics. He scoops up money from working-class consumers, gives it to the federal government, trickles it down to provincial politicians, and then expects us to believe that a few drops will go back to the people who originally paid for it in the first place. If that's true, then why can't he tell us how much will his carbon tax cost the average Canadian family?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the member opposite's expertise in trickle-down economics. That's what they specialized in for 10 years. They gave boutique tax credits to wealthy Canadians, delivered child benefit checks to millionaire families, and then when we move forward with lowering taxes for the middle class and raising them in the wealthiest 1%, they voted against it. Then we move forward on account of the child benefit that gives us more money to 9 out of 10 Canadian families and doesn't send child benefit checks to millionaires while lifting hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty, and they voted against it. Mr. Speaker, their positions are clear.
It would have been the goal of any competent government to bring an end to destructive Buy America policies that block Canadian workers and businesses from state and local projects south of the border. Yet this government has backed down to Donald Trump on pharmaceuticals with higher drug prices for Canadians, has backed down on copyright, dairy, and numerous other issues. Today, so far, they have not been able to point to any victory on Buy America. Can the minister confirm if Buy America will end with the signature of this deal?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, there's a bit of a mystery here, because last week I think the Conservatives were urging us to capitulate. They were urging us to give in. And this week, the Conservatives seem not to want a deal at all. Our government did exactly what we promised Canadians. We said we wanted a good deal, not just any deal, and a good deal is what we have.
The honourable member for Carleton. Order.
Well, it's funny that they would choose to use the word capitulate, because capitulate is precisely what they have done. They have capitulated on pharmaceuticals, allowing Trump to force higher drug costs on Canadian patients to boost American drug company profits. They've capitulated, allowing for caps on the growth of Canadian auto exports. They have capitulated on copyright and dairy. The question is, what did they get in return for all of this capitulation? Did they get an end to Buy America? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives seem to have discovered a lot of Monday morning courage, having counseled throughout this negotiation that Canada take a softer line. I think Canadians have seen that our government was determined to stand up for the national interest while being fair-minded and seeking reasonable compromise. That's exactly what we've done, Mr. Speaker, and we got a good deal for Canadians.
The honourable member for Carleton. Well, she can misrepresent our position all she wants, so I'm trying to find out the position of this government. We know that they've backed down to Donald Trump by capping future growth of Canadian auto exports. They backed down to Donald Trump, forcing Canadians to pay higher prices for pharmaceuticals. We know they backed down on copyright and dairy and other policies. What did they get in return, Mr. Speaker? Is there an end today to tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum? Yes or no? Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, let me challenge very clearly something simply wrong in what the honourable member said. This deal is great for the car sector. It is great for the car parts sector. That's why the share prices of our 3 leading car parts companies went up today. That is not a market response that says this deal is bad for our companies and our workers. This is a deal that secures growth and investment in that crucial area, and we should all be proud that we got that.
The honourable member for Carleton. Mr. Speaker, it's funny, the Liberals are trying to take credit for things we already had for 25 years. Thanks, Conservative! You know, they're trying to take credit for something that was negotiated under a previous Conservative government. We know what they sacrificed, what they gave up in backing down to Donald Trump. Higher drug costs for Canadian consumers and higher profits for American companies. We know they gave up a lot for Donald Trump, but what about on softwood lumber? Tariffs have killed jobs in the forestry industry in Canada for a long time. Have they finally put an end to Trump's tariffs on softwood lumber? Yes or no? Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what we got for the softwood lumber industry. It's something called Chapter 19. This dispute settlement mechanism is absolutely essential for our industry, and we...
Order. Alors. Alors.
Order.
Alors. Je demande
Order.
The Prime Minister told Canadians if anyone thought he'd done anything wrong on SNC, then, quote, it was their responsibility to come forward, and no one did. Yet text messages, journal entries, and audio recordings prove the former Attorney General did come forward and complain to him and his top staff on September 16th, 17th, 19th, October 26th, November 22nd, December 5th, 18th, and 19th. Does he really claim that he knew absolutely nothing about the complaint she brought forward in more than a half-dozen meetings?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in my direct encounter meeting with the former Attorney General in September, I confirmed to her that the decision around DPA was hers and hers alone. That is what has been clear throughout this entire process. There have been 13 hours of testimony, including 4 by the former Attorney General, allowed for by the fact that we put forward an unprecedented waiver that suspended solicitor-client privilege in this matter, that suspended cabinet confidentiality so that she could speak fully to this matter that was being looked at by the Justice Committee.
The member for Carleton. And at that September meeting, the Attorney General reports that she looked the Prime Minister in the eye and said, "Are you interfering with my role as Attorney General? Because I strongly advise against it." Does the Prime Minister remember her saying any such thing?
Honourable Prime Minister.
And Mr. Speaker, once she said that, I responded, no, I am not It is her decision to make. And she then committed to revisit and look into the decision once again, Mr. Speaker. All these are elements in the testimony that we have heard, that the Justice Committee examined exhaustively. But once again, we see the member opposite is desperate to talk about anything other than our budget, anything other than the economic growth we're putting forward, anything other than our concrete plan to fight climate change, because they have no plan on any of that.
No plan.
The honourable member for Carleton.
And now the Prime Minister has caught himself in a trap of his own making. He came out on February 15th and said that no one had come forward to raise any concerns about his conduct. And now he admits on the floor of the House of Commons that way before, in September, his own Attorney General asked him to his face if he was interfering. Why is it the Prime Minister having so much difficulty remembering his story? Is it because it's simply not true?
Order. The honourable member for Durham will come to order. Order. The honourable member for Banff Airdrie also. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is twisting himself into rhetorical knots to try and make a point that simply is not there. We have been crystal clear throughout this process, Mr. Speaker. We have allowed the testimonies to be heard through the Justice Committee because of an unprecedented waiver we put forward, suspending both cabinet confidentiality and solicitor-client privilege. We continue to very much stand up for our institutions and the rule of law, while always standing up for Canadians and their jobs right across the country. We will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, now the Prime Minister has effectively admitted that when he looked 37 million Canadians in the eye on February the 15th and told them that the Attorney General had never spoken a word about her concerns, that he was stating a patent falsehood. There is a word for that kind of falsehood that I cannot utter on the floor of the House of Commons. Will the Prime Minister, having now caught himself in his own trap of contradiction and deception, now apologize to the Canadian people for stating that falsehood on February 15th?
All right. Honourable Prime Minister, order.
The member from Carleton continues to try and find inconsistencies where there simply are none. We are going to continue to work together as a government on the things that matter to Canadians, as a strong, united team that is secure in the trust of this team as we move forward. We're going to stay focused on the things that matter, while the members opposite try to clutch at straws and create political complications where there are none. We are going to stay focused on Canadians while they stay focused on us.
A yes or no question. The military intelligence warned of the deadly coronavirus in a briefing to the government in early January. Yes or no, did the Prime Minister, his office, or any member of the Cabinet see these briefings? Yes or no?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada, as a member of the Five Eyes, as a member of NATO, as a member of NORAD, a close intelligence partner with all of those allies, very much including the United States, is privy to a great deal of intelligence. Of course, the global pandemic is an issue which has concerned our intelligence agencies and those of our partners, so we have been in close communication with them.
Well, member for Carleton.
Did any member of the Cabinet see that intelligence from our military, yes or no?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
As I have said, Mr. Speaker, our intelligence sharing is very important. Our intelligence sharing with our allies during this global pandemic, which poses particularly security challenges, has been, I would say, very energetic. and we continue to work with.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Question was and is, did any member of the cabinet see that military intelligence? Yes or no?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, part of the basis on which we are able to work closely with our partners, including when it comes to sharing intelligence, is sharing with Canadians only what we are able to do.
For Carleton.
We know that the intelligence exists, and we know that the military warned the government of the dangers of the coronavirus in early January. After January 22nd, how many people did this government allow into Canada from the Hubei province, the province from which the virus originated? How many?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to border controls, our government is very aware of the importance of ensuring that people coming into the country today are subject to mandatory quarantine. That quarantine is being enforced. That includes Canadians and non-Canadians. As Canadians know as well, there are strict limits today on anyone who is not Canadian entering the country.
Member for Carleton.
How many people were allowed into Canada from Hubei province after this government received intelligence showing the danger of the coronavirus from our military?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we became aware that the coronavirus was indeed a threat and that there were a number of places around the world where we were receiving people who could have the contagion of the coronavirus. That is why at the border we were very clear about giving clear instructions about the need for self-isolation.
The honourable member for Carleton.
After the government received intelligence from our military about the dangers of the coronavirus in China, it allowed 2,000 people from the Hubei province, the most affected province, to come into Canada. Were these 2,000 people quarantined? Yes or no?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I hope the member opposite knows, quarantine is a very specific legal term, and the measures of quarantine are currently in place. Prior to that obligatory quarantine being in place, incoming travelers, whether they were Canadian or not, were very clearly told to self-isolate.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Told to self-isolate but not required to self-isolate, and therefore this government allowed thousands of people into this country who came from the affected regions, even though there were briefings the government had explaining the danger of doing just that.
Did the word volunteer ever get spoken in your 30-minute meeting with Mr. Kielburger?
Madam Chair, off the top of my head, it was more of a listening exercise.
No, was it spoken? Yes or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Were you there?
Can't say that I said it. I was there.
Did someone else say it?
Madam Chair, I recall, and this is a lengthier answer, but I recall the conversation in regards to them advancing and sharing their unsolicited proposal.
Right. No, that's not my question. My question is about whether the word volunteer was spoken. Was youth service mentioned?
I will tell you that youth service is top of line for myself.
Okay, so that's
we brought
a yes?
through the Canada Service Corps in 2018.
Yes or no?
Madam Chair, I think it's important that since I am wanting to provide accurate information, that I provide all information that I have.
Minister, thank you. I do understand that, but the question has been asked of you is quite simple. It is really a yes or no question, and so you need to respect the member who is asking you that question and answer accordingly. Thank you. Minister, yes or no?
I would say service opportunities, yes, was said.
Okay, good. Now we're getting somewhere. This was just 5 days before the Canada Student Service Grant was announced and given its name. And of course, that grant wasn't mentioned because it wasn't created at the time of your meeting. But did you speak about anything at all, other than the Kielburger's social entrepreneurship proposal? Anything at all? Yes or no?
I would have definitely asked how the youth that they were working with, how they were doing in the face of the pandemic.
Did you tell? Did the Kilburgers know that the Prime Minister would make an announcement only days later on April 22nd regarding youth programming?
I cannot speak to the Kilburgers. I personally did not know on April 17th that the Prime Minister would be making that announcement.
Okay, so you didn't know, even though you're the minister responsible for that announcement. Strange. How many staff attended that meeting with you and the Kilburgers?
Madam Chair, for clarification, from my team, is he referring to?
Yes.
Or from the? I was the only person on the phone call from my team because it was in regards to
any
an
officials?
unsolicited proposal.
Any officials?
From my team, no.
It was just a phone call. 2 people?
From my team, it was myself. From the We organization, it was Craig Kilburger, and I believe Sophia was on the phone with us.
Did anybody?
They would know if there was other people from their side. It was a phone number they provided for me to dial into.
Thank you. Anyone in the PMO or the Finance Minister's office aware that you were having this phone call?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can check into that information and share it with the committee.
Did you take any notes?
Madam Chair, from that phone call, it was in regards to the unsolicited social
No, that wasn't my
program.
question. Did you take notes, yes or no? Did you take notes?
I was provided a briefing note, which has been shared.
Did you? Okay, did you take notes on your phone call? Yes or no? For the 4th time.
Everything I received was in line with.
No,
what
did you
was
take
on.
notes with your own hand? That was the question. It's a simple question. Yes or no?
The only note I would have taken would have been to ask the team to follow up with colleagues' offices in regards to the proposal and
but that's strange because a moment ago you said you'd already, by the time you did this phone call or finished it, you were not interested in that proposal. So now you were following, must have been a different proposal that you were following up on.
Madam Chair, the member can choose to put words in my mouth. It would not be his first time.
They're your
is
words.
a repetitive behavior. So I will say that
Let's not get distracted
something
here.
that I was not considering, but it's important for the team and also for officials to be aware of it.
Okay.
And to make sure that they look and consider
All
its
right.
merits.
So you decided that you weren't going to pursue that proposal, yet you wrote notes to your staff and officials to follow up on that proposal. Okay, very clear.
So
we're going to move on to
Chair,
another question now.
Madam Chair.
I'm on to my question. I didn't ask a question yet, so she's had plenty of chances to respond, and that's
you put words
I'm
in my
glad.
mouth.
So
very classy.
Next issue here. You were aware that the Prime Minister withdrew your proposal from the cabinet meeting on May the 8th. Yes or no?
The Prime Minister testified and shared that information.
And the We organization had already begun implementing the Canada Summer Student Service Grant on the 5th, 3 days earlier. So did you instruct anybody to immediately call We and say, stop, the Prime Minister has pushed back and that this program is not approved by Cabinet and therefore We has got to put its actions on hold? Yes or no?
Madam Chair, the Prime Minister, as he stated, actually, it was about due diligence from officials, so I would like the Deputy to have a minute to answer.
I'm sorry, Minister, we are out of time. I'm going to hand the floor over to Mr. Gerritsen.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I do think that they should have a chance to respond, if possible.
Mr. Poilievre, you're putting me in a difficult position here.
I thought he only did that to us.
Mr. Gerritsen, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, you were on the receiving end of a fairly hostile accusation there by Mr. Poilievre. Would you like the opportunity to respond to that, Minister?
Madam Chair, I think it would be important for the Deputy to be provided an opportunity to answer the accusations that are being provided by the Conservative member. Hello.
So the question was in relation to an earlier start date. Why was it effective on May 5th? And as generally occurs with contribution agreements, a start date may be identified prior to the date of the agreement's signature. This is routinely done when organizations may incur eligible expenses prior to that signature. If the earlier start date is not approved, the organization is reimbursed for expenses or expenditures incurred, and do this completely at their own risk. Similarly, if the agreement is not signed, the organization would not be reimbursed for any expenses incurred. It may often take weeks for a contribution agreement to be negotiated, and that is what occurred in this particular instance. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Minister, let's not beat around the bush here and pretend that your appearance before this committee somehow has nothing to do with the fallout of the situation with the student service grant. So I'll just be blunt. Did you knowingly brush off signs of conflict of interest or any perception thereof when you were presented with the recommendation to enlist the WE charity to deliver this program?
Madam Chair, I can tell you that I take the Conflict of Interest Act very seriously. No, I would never brush off any signs, and that's why I ensured that I worked with officials to ensure that due diligence was done, and I believe that they did their due diligence.
And they did give you that recommendation, right, Minister? Because when Mr. Barrett was speaking with the clerk of the Privy Council previous to this, he said, this is Mr. Barrett's words, and I quote, Cabinet accepted the recommendation of the public service. This kind of goes against a little bit about what the Conservatives have been trying to purport in their rhetoric out there, that somehow that wasn't the case. But this was a recommendation from the public service, as Mr. Barrett said, correct?
Madam Chair, this was the recommendation that was repeated on numerous occasions. As has been noted, it is a proposal that went to the COVID committee. There was numerous questions asked. Those questions were asked of officials. Officials responded and came back with the same recommendation. We also asked for other recommendations. Who else could deliver a program to the scale, the scope, this timeline? And once again, in writing, the public service did provide us that it was the only organization that could deliver the program to the scale, scope, and timeline that we were looking for.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. That's everything.
I will proceed with giving one question to the Conservatives and one question to the Liberals. Conservative member can go.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The question is not about why the contribution agreement was backdated. The question is very simple. The Prime Minister claims that he put the entire WE program on hold on May the 8th. Minister Chagger, did anyone in the government at that moment direct WE to stop administering the program when the Prime Minister did that on May 8th? Yes or no?
Madam Chair, that was a lengthy question, but I'll provide a short answer, not that I'm aware of.
All the new debt the government's adding, will it be repaid before interest rates rise?
Well, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in my speech last week, we are extending the maturities of our debt to lock in current interest rates, which are at a 100-year low, our debt service charges.
Perfect. What percentage of the new debt the government has added since March has been locked in for more than 5 years?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to be offering detailed projections and numbers in my economic update later on this fall, not tonight. But I will cite the
Honourable Member.
Is it more than 50%?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister's numbers on these issues are very sensitive, and I'm not going to...
The Honourable Member.
It's actually not sensitive at all. It's published by the Bank of Canada. If the Minister had just gone to the Bank of Canada's website, she would know that less than 10% of the new debt the government has borrowed is locked in for more than 5 years. The other 91% is locked in for longer terms. Why did the Minister tell people that she was locking in low rates when, in fact, 91% of the debt is on short-term maturities?
The Honourable Minister.
we have a program, as I said last week, moving into longer-term debt instruments. This is to lock in current rates. That is exactly what we are doing right now.
It's exactly the opposite of what she is doing, and I'm surprised that she didn't visit the Bank of Canada website where she could have found out that less than 10% of the new debt her government has issued since March is long-term. The rest is short-term. In fact, it is shorter duration than our pre-existing debt. Why did the minister mislead an audience last week when she claimed that she was locking in debt for the long run, while Bank of Canada data shows precisely the opposite? What percentage of the government's debt is now owned by the Bank of Canada? What percentage?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite knows, our government is operating very much within the
The Honourable Member.
The question is, what percentage of our debt is owed to the Bank of Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, Canada has the fiscal firepower to do what it needs to do. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio.
The Honourable Member.
Is there any limit to the amount the Bank of Canada can print to borrow to the government?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite should be very careful not to ask the Finance Minister questions better addressed to the Bank of Canada. I am aware of the independent.
The Honourable Member.
Who holds the shares of the Bank of Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm the Finance Minister.
The Honourable Member.
She holds the shares of the Bank of Canada. She's the shareholder. She holds them all. So she's the only one we can ask here in the House of Commons. How much can the Bank of Canada print to fund borrowing to the government?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be very serious for a moment. The independence of the Bank of Canada is one of the central pillars of the Canadian economy. And I'm not going to be frivolous about that or make frivolous comments.
The Honourable Member.
It wouldn't be frivolous to tell us how much the bank can print to lend to the government. These are not frivolous questions. They're hundreds of billions of dollars worth of questions. If she considers that frivolous, well, I'm afraid we have someone in this job that doesn't care about taxpayers' money. How much can the Bank of Canada print to borrow to the government of Canada? How much?
Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important to be clear that it is one of the central principles of how the Canadian economy works is we have an independent Bank of Canada, something, by the way, that the member opposite has raised questionable questions about. And
Honourable Member. The Honourable Member.
How much has the bank printed this year to fund borrowing to the government?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, I really want to make clear tonight that an independent Bank of Canada is key to how the Canadian economy works, and I think that it is something that actually all members of this House.
The Honourable Member.
Her government is dependent on the printing presses over at the Bank of Canada. Question: how much has the government of Canada borrowed from the Bank of Canada this year?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it represents a profound misunderstanding of how the Canadian economy or any other economy works to suggest that there is some kind of questionable relationship between our government and the Bank of Canada.
The Honourable Member.
Well, if it wasn't questionable, she'd be willing to talk about it out in the open. I asked how much has the Bank of Canada printed to pay for the government's debts. It's just a mathematical question that should be publicly available. Why is the minister hiding it?
Honourable Minister.
I'm not hiding anything, Mr. Speaker. What I am doing is two things. One, being very clear, and this is important for markets, and it is important for Canadians, and it is important for our Bank of Canada to know. I will stand here all night long defending the independence, the propriety, and the fine judgment of the people in the bank.
The Honourable Member.
But she won't tell the people of Canada how much of their money is being debased to fund her government spending. So I will ask one last time, and then we will know if she won't answer that she's covering it up. How much of the debt of the government of Canada has been financed by printing by the Bank of Canada this year?
The Honourable Minister.
It is profoundly irresponsible of the member opposite to suggest that a finance minister defending the independence of the Bank of Canada is, quote unquote, covering up. That's not how we do things in Canada, and I am happy for members here to ask questions about our programs. Very happy. I'm happy for members here to ask questions about our...
The honourable member.
I don't think the minister has given a single number with regards to any of these questions. I don't know why that is. If it's because she believes that Canadians don't have the right to know, then she should just say so. She won't tell us the limits on the debt. She won't tell us how much the Bank of Canada has printed to fund her government's debt. She won't tell us whether the debt will be paid back before interest rates rise. Is there anything mathematical or numerical about our debt that anyone on the government side can share with the Canadian taxpayers who will have to repay that debt?
Minister of Finance.
Let me say a couple of numerical and mathematical things to the member opposite. The first is that the debt service charges as a share of GDP that Canada is paying today is the lowest in 100 years. That's right. Notwithstanding the very considerable support we have given the economy so far, the debt service charges are the lowest in 100 years. That is a very...
The honourable member for Carleton.
Great, we're getting somewhere now. How much would they go up in cost if the interest rates rose just 1%?
The honourable minister.
Let me share another very important number with the member opposite. 76% of COVID-19 job losses recovered in Canada.
The honourable member for Carleton.
So again, the minister can't even tell us what it would cost Canadian taxpayers for interest rates to go up. Just 1%. Just 1%, which would still be far below the historic average. Why is she so afraid to give that number?
The minister tells us that the Bank of Canada is accountable to the people. That is good news. The bank has bought $180 million of corporate bonds. To be accountable to the people, it has to tell people where their money went. So will the minister commit that the bank will reveal which corporations got that money?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, as I said earlier, I am a very strong believer in the importance that the independence of the Bank of Canada plays in our economy and in our financial system. And I would urge members to ask questions pertaining to the Bank of Canada of the Bank of Canada.
Thank you. Mr. Poilievre.
The minister says the bank is accountable to the people. We are the people's representatives. Surely we should know. So where did the $180 million go?
Madam Minister.
Mr. Chair, I want to be very clear with all members of this committee of the importance of an independent central bank in the functioning of the Canadian economy. And I also want to be clear that it is undermining of our economy to be raising questions in the minds of Canadians about the independence of the Bank of Canada. Yes, that is not responsible behavior.
I'm sorry to be raising questions about where Canadians' money is going. You might find that dangerous, but I'll ask one last time. Will you tell us where the $180 million that the Bank of Canada pumped into corporate bonds went? Where did it go?
In no way does the government seek to conceal or keep secret the activities of the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada is a highly transparent, highly responsible institution. And I have a question for the Conservative members. Do they respect the independence of the Bank of Canada as previous Conservative finance ministers like the late Jim Flaherty did? I hope they do. The Canadian economy depends on it.
All right.
Can I answer the question,
thank
Mr.
you.
Chair?
No,
Time's up. Sorry, it's called a rhetorical question.
You can make a statement.
Rhetorical question.
You
I
can
ask
make
factual questions. I will just answer the minister's question to me, whether Conservatives believe in the independence of the Bank of Canada. Of course we do. She cites Jim Flaherty. And not only did he believe in the independence of the Bank of Canada, he never funded his deficits by having the Bank of Canada print money to lend it to the government. In fact, throughout the entire Great Global Recession, we never relied on the bank to print cash to fund our operations. That is something that this minister and this government are doing. They are dependent on the bank and therefore cannot be independent from it. Do you support the Prime Minister's decision to veto the Northern Gateway pipeline, Mr. Carney?
I understand the veto of the Northern Gateway pipeline.
You support it?
Given both environmental and commercial reasons.
Do you support it?
I think it was sensible. I wasn't involved in the decision, but I think it was the right decision.
And yet your company has invested billions of dollars in oil companies in both Brazil and the UAE to buy pipelines. You bought billions of dollars of pipelines as a company in the last 5 years. Do you support those investments?
Mr. Poilievre, there is a global energy system, and one of the issues, I'm trying to explain a bit of how the economy works. One of the
Thank
issues,
you so much.
It may help. One of the issues for this committee in thinking about a sustainable transition.
Do you support it?
Where is Canada's role in those as energy transitions from fossil fuels to renewables? And in different jurisdictions, into different geography, it matters. It matters, and this is a fundamental point.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. This is a fundamental. You're
finally
getting
the
to
time.
A point
You've exceeded
that
the
is
time.
relevant to this committee's inquiry.
What you're saying is you oppose pipelines in Canada, but you support them in the UAE and in Brazil. That's what you've actually said.
There are specific.
That's your double standard.
It is not a double standard.
It is a double standard.
No, it's not.
You make billions of dollars off foreign pipelines, and you shut them down here at home, putting our people out of work.
That you are a representative of the Canadian people, and one of your responsibilities, including at this committee,
is to fight for Canadian jobs, and not foreign jobs like you.
Exactly, to fight for Canadian jobs, and the types of Canadian jobs that are durable and are going to move forward.
Right.
I grew up in Alberta. I know the innovative nature of that.
Well, go try to give that answer back in Alberta, because I grew up there too, and I can tell you the people. I can tell you the people of Alberta would be ashamed with the answer you just gave. That you would give billions of dollars to foreign pipelines, while not allowing Canadians to build pipelines here at home. That is the kind of elite Davos hypocrisy.
Could I please,
Madam Chair? This is really unbecoming of a member to badger any witness. This is really, truly unacceptable.
Continue, Mr. Poilievre.
Thank you. Mr. Carney, you've just said you support your leader's decision to kill a Western Canadian pipeline that ships the most ethical product in the world. Yet you also support your company's decision to invest billions of dollars in foreign pipelines in Brazil and in the UAE. It's clear that this is not about the environment. If it were, you'd be consistent and you'd oppose fossil fuels everywhere. But you're happy to profit off of foreign fossil fuel companies while killing jobs among our own people. How do you address that flagrant hypocrisy? It smacks of the Davos elite at its worst.
Okay. First thing, absolutely, I support Canadian jobs, and I support Canadian jobs today and tomorrow. And in order to have those jobs tomorrow, what we need and what this committee can contribute is an energy transition. The Canadian fossil fuels, Canadian companies will play an essential role. Brookfield itself is heavily invested in Canada, including in energy infrastructure for fossil fuels, but it's also, and we connect collectively as Canadians, and we look to our parliament to support this, need to be putting in place the energies and industries of the future. That means carbon capture and storage. That means blue hydrogen, and both of which are absolutely essential for Canadian jobs in my home province of Alberta, and that's where the future lies. Now, we need to have the overall picture, which is why, and I'll finish with this, Chair, I emphasize the clear pathways, walking back from that, not jumping on specifics, and not seeing the bigger picture, nor providing the support that Canadians deserve.
Have you advised any ministers in the government, their staff or deputy ministers since September?
Advised. I have been asked questions from time to time by ministers and deputies, yes.
About climate finance? Have you talked to them about that?
I have talked to I have talked to some ministers about climate finance. I would
Since
remind,
September?
if I would,
Since September?
Well, I am the UN Special Envoy for Climate Finance, and I've spoken to ministers, deputy ministers, leaders.
Okay, since September?
I would add.
Sorry, you seem to be dodging the question. I don't know what you're hiding there. Is it since September?
Mr. Poilievre, I began with yes, so that is not a dodge.
Okay,
But I'm
good. Then you've answered
just-
the question. Have you contacted the lobbying commissioner to find out if this is in contravention of the rules? Given that you do stand to profit off of the policy decisions in this area, you are part of a company that could potentially make financial gains from the massive subsidies and other government policies that you profited from at a provincial level. Have you checked with the lobbying
Madam Chair,
commissioner
point
as
of
to
order.
whether- Yes, Mr. Carney, you do stand to profit off of these policies, and yet you are regularly intervening and influencing the decisions of ministers, deputy ministers, and you've done so since you became an executive at Brookfield. Did you register, yes or no, your interactions with the lobbying commissioner?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to have the premises to that question, Stan. I do not intervene. I do not influence. I would remind the members.
Did you register?
I would remind that I am an envoy of the United Nations, an advisor of the
Right,
UK
another
Prime
conflict
Minister
of interest.
with respect to COP26, and that the United Nations and the UK government.
Did you register to lobby, Mr. Carney? Yes or no?
I may be allowed to. If I may, no. I have testified.
Did you
100
register to
times
lobby?
to Parliament?
Did you register to
over
lobby?
my career? I'm normally
Did you register to
allowed
lobby?
and answer the question.
Madam Chair,
Did you register to
point
lobby?
of order.
Did he register to lobby?
I represent the United Nations. I represent the UK.
Do you register?
government for the
Did you register to
purposes of
lobby?
COP.
Yes or no?
We have a public
Point of order, Madam Chair.
strategy. I would like
Point
to
of
answer
order.
the question.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Your company says that it seeks to make profit off of these so-called green investments, which usually mean government subsidies. So you have a financial interest in these policies, sir. Your bonus is probably tied to them. Did you register to lobby the many ministers, deputy ministers, and staff that you've contacted since you took this job? Yes or no?
I don't lobby, period.
Unfortunately, that's your.
Mr. Mill, I'd like to ask you about the supply chain behind today's so-called green technologies. You pointed out that the mining inputs that are necessary to create solar panels and batteries are largely sourced from countries like China. I'm going to quote the International Energy Agency report you mentioned. The Democratic Republic of Congo and People's Republic of China are responsible for 70% and 60% of global production of cobalt and rare earth elements, respectively, in 2019. The level of concentration is even higher for processing operations, where China has a strong presence across the board. China's share of refining is around 35% of nickel, 50 to 70% for lithium needed for batteries and cobalt, and nearly 90% for the rare earth elements. So by subsidizing the battery-powered vehicle, are we effectively driving more production to China?
Well, the short answer is yes, unavoidably, because we don't have the capacity outside of China for either the mining or, as the IEA pointed out, the refining. 30 years ago, North America, United States and Canada together, produced 80% of the world's rare earth elements. This is a neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, these magical sounding minerals that are critical in all kinds of high technology machines, including green energy machines. I would say we sort of chased those businesses out of the North American continent, and China eagerly embraced expanding the mining. It just takes time to, even if tomorrow in Canada, which, as I've said before, is friendlier than the United States to new mines, I think you've already experienced the challenge in both northern Quebec and neighboring Greenland, is what it takes to open a new rare earth mine.
Well, it takes a lot of governmental delay to open any mine in this country. We have some of the most slow and cumbersome processes to even get the government out of the way and let construction begin. But
China powers many of its industrial and mining activities with coal-fired electricity. In other words, we increase global emissions of greenhouse gases whenever we drive more production to China. Given that the component parts of electric automobiles come from coal-fire powered mines in China, is it in fact true that electric vehicles are lower emitting than, say, a small Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic when you look at the life cycle of the vehicle, including its original mining and production through to the disposal of the vehicle?
Well, the really honest scientific answer is we don't know. So the slogan that reduces emissions is actually not knowable. But we do know, when you look at points you raised, that it can be the case, depending on the exact source of the minerals, that the EV driven in Canada emits more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere than a very efficient, best-of-class internal combustion engine. And that's I think that's a serious problem to sort out.
Right, because presumably the reason why we are subsidizing these electric vehicles is that they are supposedly better for the environment. Right. But if the production of the battery technology, if the mining of the minerals that go into the vehicle emits far greater greenhouse gases than are saved by having that vehicle on the road, then it is a counterproductive subsidy. Would you, in a word, agree with that?
Absolutely. It's profoundly counterproductive.
I'd now like to welcome our witnesses from the Ministry of Finance. We will have with us...
How is the government paying the $7 billion bill associated with this proposal?
That question is directed to who, Mr. Poilievre?
Anyone who wants to answer it. If they have anyone over there that is concerned about where the money comes from, that person could speak up.
Maybe you could choose one of the witnesses.
I don't know who on their side is responsible for this, but clearly they're getting the money from somewhere, so they must know where. Anyone here from Finance Canada?
I see Mr. Baylor.
Mr. Chair, I can provide a high-level response, but I'm afraid I won't be able to answer directly the honourable member's question because we're here to discuss it. And what I can say with regards to the cost of the measures in terms of Part 1, the three first programs that I mentioned, the hospitality, the tourism and hospitality recovery program, part businesses recovery program, and the local lockdown program have a cost of $3.2 billion.
And where's sorry, Mr. Baylor, where's the money coming from?
Well, Mr. Chair, that is within the government's broader macro economic framework, and I'm not I can't speak to that.
So you don't have anyone. It's just that we're being asked to vote in favor of another $7 billion of spending. And the obvious question is, where's it coming from?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated, I can discuss the contents of the bill, and I appreciate the question, but I can't answer that question.
Well, somebody's paying for it. Who is it? Did the Tooth Fairy? No answer.
We're here respectfully to answer questions to C2 as we study.
Right. C2 has a $7 billion bill. That's the price tag. Right. That's what I'm asking about. Where's the $7 billion coming from?
There's a lot of people are willing to talk about how they're spending the money, but no one wants to talk about where it comes from. How many witnesses do we have here? We have the number? Mr. Chair?
10? Is it 10?
10 witnesses? 10 witnesses to tell us about how to spend money, but not a single one to tell us where the money comes from. Anyone, Mr. Chair, can you help us?
Mr. Poilievre, the floor is yours to ask your questions.
Well, I've asked the same question 5 or 6 times. No one seems to be able to answer it. I'm just worried that the answer is not one my constituents are going to want to hear. Because right now, I have 30-year-olds living in their parents' basement because housing inflation has priced them out of the market. I have single moms in my neighborhoods that can't afford a healthy basket of groceries to feed their kids. I have seniors whose savings are being vaporized by inflation. And now we have the prospect that deficits are going to drive up interest rates. So you can forgive me if my focus today is not on all the wonderful things the government's spending money on, but instead on where the money comes from. Because so far, all the money seems to be coming out of the pocket of working class folks who are paying record inflation.
Mr. Poilievre?
I have a strictly technical question. That is, where's the money coming from? $7 billion cost. The money must be coming from somewhere. Like, is there a money tree? Is there a printing press?
Point of order,
That's
Mr. Chair.
the technical question I'm asking. I appreciate the Liberals across the way don't want it answered. What is the total amount of public and private debt in Canada today?
We are going to give a full report on Canada's public finances on Tuesday, but I am happy to say that the net worth of Canadian households is up 22% from the beginning of the crisis, and that in Q3 the household savings rate was 4%.
The question is
was 11%
of
compared
Canadians
to
today.
3.4% in.
Sorry, Minister. Just for the interpreters, it is very difficult, the crosstalk that happens when you interject and not allow just the finishing, at least of a sentence. So allow the minister just to conclude her remarks.
Well, it was the question was, what is the total debt level, public and private, in Canada today? Just looking for that particular number.
And I am happy to say that on Tuesday, just a few days from now, we're going to give a full public accounting. But I am pleased also to remind the member that the savings rate of Canadians was 11% in the third quarter, up from 3.4% between 2010 and 2019.
Question for Mr. Leswick. Does he know the total debt, public and private, that exists in Canada today?
I believe that the rule is that the questions go to me here.
Is he a witness? He is a witness. I
I'm
thought
not
he might have the number.
Witnesses do
Questions
have
can be posed to him.
They
Okay,
can,
Nick,
yes.
go ahead if you wish.
I apologize to the member. I don't have that number at my fingertips.
That's a pretty important number. I'm amazed that a Minister of Finance and a senior finance official would not know how much debt there is in Canada today. What would be the total cost for if there were a 1% average increase of interest rates on Canada's national debt per year? Just the number.
And here, just let me say, when we publish the economic and fiscal update on Tuesday, we will include, as we did in the budget, as we always do, downside and upside risk scenarios. And those will include a careful accounting of
Thank you. I
the
appreciate
impact
that.
of higher than
The question was
expected
really
interest
how much
rates.
it would cost if interest rates went up even 1 percentage point on Canada's national debt. The minister, this is sort of a number we would expect the government to know on any given day, not to have to wait for a report. So what would it cost for a 1 percentage point increase in interest rates on Canada's national debt? Just the number, please.
The information that is published in the economic and fiscal update, which will be on Tuesday, is market sensitive. We publish it all at the same time, and I am not I have not come to this committee for an early reveal of the economic and fiscal update, but all the numbers are there.
Right.
And I do want to say,
Well,
because
that
it is
based on your most
it is
recent
important-
publication. Based
it
on
is
your most recent
important to
publication,
say
what's
to
the number?
Canadians.
Thank you very much. I guess with all the money printing deficits, they didn't have enough paper left to print these documents, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister of Inflation for her presentation today. It reveals that inflation is in fact 50% higher than she promised in the budget. Wow. And the deflation that she said we'd have a year ago has definitely not materialized. $500 billion of inflationary deficits mean more dollars chasing fewer goods and higher prices. The result, of course, is that housing and gas is up by a third, making it hard for people to get to work or house themselves. Food prices will rise $1,000 for the average family next year, and not to mention that taxes cost the average family more than food, clothing, and shelter combined. The more this government spends, the more Canadians pay. And to add insult to injury, we learned today that the government is collecting a windfall of tax revenue as they get higher taxes on higher prices. It's called the inflation tax, or as liberals would say, just inflation. So my question is a very specific one. How much in extra tax revenue will the government collect as a result of higher than expected inflation on the backs of Canadian consumers?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that question actually was a very general and meandering one. So I'm going to offer a general and specific answer. And let me say this. Yes, the government did undertake extraordinary spending.
Second, I'm going to interrupt the Honourable Minister. Is there a problem with... No, I'm sorry. Somebody was signaling that their earpiece wasn't working. I believe it's working now. Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue, Madam Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So let me be very clear. Yes, the government did undertake extraordinary spending to support Canadians during the fight against COVID-19. And Mr. Speaker, in this fiscal update, we are making provision for further spending in that fight. We are spending on therapeutics. We are spending on rapid tests. We are spending on boosters. And we are making a $4.5 billion provision to account for potential additional costs imposed by Omicron. Mr. Speaker, I am absolutely confident that the vast majority of Canadians understand that this spending is not only necessary, it is essential to protect health and also to protect our economy. And Mr. Speaker, the results speak for themselves. Our economy has already more than recovered all the jobs we lost to the COVID recession. GDP is nearly at pre-pandemic levels, and this is a better performance than most of our peer countries around the world.
Carleton.
Thank you. My question is for the Minister of Middle Class Prosperity, who is a Member of Parliament here in Ottawa. What is the average cost for a home in the City of Ottawa?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my title is the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance. I'm sure my honourable colleague across the way knows that. But let me say, Mr. Speaker, 156,000 jobs.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
The Minister of Treasury Board can help by telling us the average cost of a house in the nation's capital.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say 106% of jobs have been recovered since the lowest point of the pandemic.
Member for Carleton.
What is the average increase in house prices since this government took office in 2015?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's economy contracted by 17% between February and April 2020, the largest and most sudden contraction in real GDP since the Great Depression, and we're already back.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Just the average house price.
The Honourable Minister.
5.5 million Canadians lost their jobs, and they're all back.
Member for Carleton.
And what would they pay for the average house?
The
In
Minister.
2020, unemployment rated more than doubled from a pre-pandemic level of 5.7% to a record of 13.7%, 6% now.
Member for Carleton.
I think there's a problem with the audio in the chamber. The question was, what is the average cost of a house in Canada today?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government has made historic investments in housing affordability, and we will continue to do so.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
And how affordable are such houses?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government has made historic investments in housing. We will continue to do so that housing is affordable for all Canadians.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
If so, how much have house prices increased since this government took office?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about how it is possible for people to afford their houses with good employment, and that's why employment income fell by an unprecedented $28 billion during the pandemic.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
One last time, in dollars, how much have house prices risen since this government took office?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, consumer confidence is back. People are back to work. 106% of jobs have been recovered since the lowest point in the pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
How much?
Minister.
From a steep decline in profits, we're back 66% since the bottom of the pandemic.
Carleton.
How much?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the economy is recovering.
Member for Carleton.
Does the minister have any idea what it costs for the average person to buy a house in Canada? Does he have any idea, or does he even care?
Mr. Speaker,
the Minister.
City helped more than 213,000 businesses stay afloat.
I think that the average Canadian can see how much this government knows and cares about the cost of buying a home in this country, which is their level of care is zero. I'm going to give him one last chance. Can he tell us what it costs the average Canadian to buy the average house in Canada today? How much?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the CERB helped nearly 9 million Canadians who lost their jobs when COVID hit, making housing affordable for them. We will continue to do so.
Mr. Speaker, the member bragged about the CERB. According to the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, reporting entities indicated that clients have applied for and received CERB despite not living in Canada and appear to be residing in a jurisdiction of concern. How many people not living in Canada got the CERB? How many?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that the honourable colleague wants to talk something of substance, and so let's talk about the CEBA that helped over 898,000 small businesses survive. Think of the families, think of the people that helped to afford housing and to make their ends meet, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Carleton.
I'm glad to know that he doesn't think housing or debt are matters of substance. Back to the CERB fraud. How many people not in Canada got the CERB? How many?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the wage subsidy helped over 450,000 employers keep more than 5.3 million employees on the payroll. That's our track record.
The question was about the CERB, not the wage subsidy. How many people not in Canada got the CERB? How many?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure the honourable member heard me that when we're talking of substance, we're talking about Canadians that were supported.
Member for
9
Carleton.
million through the CERB.
I think the problem is he's not hearing me. The question was about the CERB. FinTrack says people who don't even live in Canada were getting the CERB. How many of them got it? How many?
Minister.
The data that I have shows very clearly 9 million Canadians who lost their jobs were supported by the CERB when the COVID hit.
Member for Carleton.
Did you just say 9 million people not living in Canada got the CERB?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I did not say that.
Member for Carleton.
So how many?
Mr. Speaker, 9 million Canadians living in Canada were supported by the CERB. Think about that. Transformative.
Member for Carleton.
Who will pay for the fraudulent CERB recipients?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the rent subsidy helped more than 230,000
Member for
businesses
Carleton.
survive.
Fraudulent CERB recipients was the question. How many?
Minister.
9 million Canadians supported by CERB.
Member for Carleton.
So the only number we're getting was 9 million when I asked how many people took the CERB that didn't live in Canada. If 9 million isn't the right number, which number is?
Speaker,
Minister.
maybe the honourable member would like to know about CEBA that helped over 898,000 small businesses survive.
Member for Carleton.
Why is the minister hiding the true number of people not living in Canada who got the CERB?
Minister.
Following a steep decline of 27% in the first half of the 2020, corporate profits rebounded to 61% above pre-pandemic levels.
Member for Carleton.
Could we replace the minister with a cassette tape that we could just hit play on?
I guess that's a question for the minister. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure there's all kinds of technological advancements available, but I can tell you that the wage subsidy helped over 450,000 employers.
Member for Carleton.
5.3 million.
Is there a technological advance that might help the minister answer the question?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the rent subsidy helped more than 213,000 businesses stay afloat. That's good for all Canadians.
Member for Carleton.
Can the officials who are here today hand the minister a new script? He seems to be reading one unrelated to the questions.
All right, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Let's talk about consumer confidence that went to an all-time low. It's back. That's good for business. That's good for Canadians.
Member for Carleton.
One last time, FinTrack, which is responsible for monitoring monies that are misappropriated in organized crime and money laundering, indicates that many people receive the CERB even though they don't even live in Canada. I'm going to ask one last time, how many was that?
Minister.
The member knows that FinTrack is independent. What we know is consumer confidence is back. The people are able to pay their bills thanks to our historic investments in their lives and in their livelihoods.
Member for Carleton.
What has been the inflation rate for the price of land in the last year?
Minister.
I'm glad to talk about inflation because we know that it's a global phenomenon.
Member for Carleton.
Land prices are a global phenomenon. Does the minister realize that the land we have here doesn't come from the rest of the globe? It's already here?
Minister.
I think you can read Hansard, and as the honourable colleague can, I said very clearly, inflation is a global phenomenon.
Member for Carleton.
Landflation, how much?
Minister.
Our inflation is in line with peer countries around the world, and in fact, we're doing much better than the United States, Mexico, and countries in the Eurozone.
Member for Carleton.
The question was about land price inflation. How much have land prices inflated in the last year?
Minister.
Land price is part of the basket of goods in inflation. Our inflation is in line with peer countries.
Member for Carleton.
He's allowed to say he doesn't know.
Mr. Speaker, we're focused on affordability, and that's what matters.
Member for Carleton.
There's no affordability to focus on. How much have house prices risen in the last year?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me say that the unemployment rate had more than doubled from a pre-pandemic level of 5% in May 2020, and we are now
Member for Carleton.
6%.
Again, the question was how much have house prices inflated in the last year?
Can I take a second just when I say minister, then you can talk. Like you're starting to jump up. So, Member for Carleton. Or actually, sorry, minister, to answer that question. Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important for the honourable member across the way to understand that our government helped 9 million Canadians who lost their job through the CERB.
Carleton.
They hand him a speech that they wrote for him, a bureaucrat wrote for him, and he just stays glued to it. I mean, why don't we just elect a robot to read off these speeches that are written by bureaucrats in the finance department? Because that robot at least would stick more tightly to the script than he has. If he doesn't actually have any answers to the factual questions, is it possible that he could be replaced with a robot?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that the member opposite doesn't like the answers that I'm providing, but I know that Canadians do. And the net worth of Canadian households fell by 3.6% in the first quarter of 2020, one of the largest declines on record. And this metric is now up 22% from its pre-crisis level. And consumer confidence is back on the rise. 156,000 jobs announced last week, 106% of jobs back.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Right. The question wasn't how much poorer Canadians have gotten. The question is how much more expensive their housing has become. Can the member tell us what is the average house price right across Canada today?
The Honourable Minister.
I think labour force participation is a good metric to help answer the member's question. It has reached a new high of 79.6%. That shows a strong sign of confidence about job prospects, and that's how people...
The Honourable member for Carleton.
Can the average Canadian afford the average house?
The Honourable Minister.
I'm not entirely sure what the question was, Mr. Speaker, but I can say this: 106%.
The Honourable member for Carleton.
The question was, can the average Canadian afford the average house?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are there to support housing affordability and will continue to do so.
The Honourable member for Carleton.
All right. Maybe more specifically, then, what share of the average Canadian's take-home pay would they have to spend on mortgages and other housing costs in order to live in the average house?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, housing is a right. That is why this House has declared it as such. We've made historic investments in housing stock, housing affordability, and affordable housing, and will continue to do so.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
And what would it cost the average person to buy the average house in Canada today?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to say that the economic contraction of the Canadian economy was 17%.
Member for Carleton.
We know the economy collapsed, but somehow real estate prices went up. The question was how much how much would it cost the average family to afford the average house today?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, GDP has rebounded to almost 99% of its pre-pandemic level. 106% of jobs have been recovered. 156,000 announced just last week.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
What is the average rent cost for the average Canadian today?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the first half of 2020, employment income fell by an unprecedented $28 billion.
Member for Carleton.
What is the total dollar value of insurance in force at the CMHC? Just the number, please.
So currently, our insurance in force is, let me just get that. It's $404 billion.
And then what is the total value of guarantees under the National Housing Act, mortgage-backed securities, and Canada mortgage bonds? The total, please, the number.
The total is 460.
So if you add those two numbers up, 404 plus $460 billion, I get $864 billion. Is that the total value of the amount of money the government is on the hook for when it comes to backing up mortgages?
So thank you, Chair, and just in response to Mr. Poilievre's question, the reason I hesitated when he first asked the question is
right. We don't have a lot of time.
I know those two numbers, but there's duplication because some of the mortgages are in the securitization
I know
number.
that. I know that, Ms. Powers. But what I'm asking for, what is the total number? And what I did ask you for the first time is, what is the total number when you remove the duplication?
So I don't have that number on hand, but we can certainly get that.
That is
for you.
very disappointing because we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of contingent liability.
Point of order.
Yes.
Point of order.
This way of questioning, to me, make me uncomfortable in front of our witness. I'd like Mr. Poilievre to be a tiny bit more respectful towards our witness, please.
Okay. We have talked about respect and decorum, Mr. Poilievre, but and just crosstalk. So for the interpreter's sake, so let's try to just stop that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Well, it makes me uncomfortable that we have hundreds of billions of dollars of unknown contingent liabilities. Ms. Romy, if people do default on their mortgages, your corporation then pays the default loss to the bank, and taxpayers could be on the hook for that money. And the fact that you don't know the total amount of guarantees that your government, that your organization is offering on behalf of taxpayers to our banks is problematic. I'll explain why. If our housing prices simply went back to the level they were at in 2020, that would be nearly a 25% reduction in house prices. And if people went defaulted on those houses, many would be underwater. So taxpayers would then have to pay for the default loss. And I would expect that the head of the corporation that is managing these liabilities and this risk for taxpayers would know the number and have them at fingertip. And I want to go to Mr. Rutledge now to further talk about the risk. What percentage of new mortgages in last year were variable rate?
Roughly 51 or 52%.
That's an unusually high share, isn't it?
It is unusually high,
so when rates rise, those people are immediately going to have higher payments, aren't they?
Mr. Chair, you're right. That is a correct statement.
And what percentage of households who've got mortgages in the last year have 5% down?
What percent of mortgages, Mr. Chair, have 5% down?
Yeah, a down payment of 5%.
I would have to look into that and come back to the committee, and I will do so.
And when you do make a 5% down payment, you have to pay mortgage insurance to CMHC or the other providers, and that is tacked onto the value of the mortgage, isn't it?
Typically, yes.
Yes,
Mr.
so
Chair,
that
that's correct.
5%, for a 5% down, you have to pay 4% in mortgage insurance fees, which means that you only, once you subtract the mortgage insurance from your down payment, you actually only have 1% net equity in your house then, don't you?
All else equal, everyone's different, and I wouldn't make a broad
so if
statement,
someone's got
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
Understand why the Liberals don't want these questions asked.
Point of order.
Not at all. Not at all.
Point of order, Ms. Zarowicz.
I can understand why these Liberals don't want these questions asked.
There's a point of order, Ms. Poilievre. Yeah, Ms. Zarowicz.
I actually think these questions are very important, but I also think the answers are very important. And I feel like Mr. Rutledge isn't allowed to actually fully answer the question. So I would ask that he be allowed to do so.
No, I
have been taking timings here, and Mr. Poilievre had 14 seconds, and the last one 7 seconds, and he cut into Mr. Rutledge, who had 1 second and 0.41 to answer. So, Mr. Poilievre, equal time, please, for the witnesses to answer those questions.
Fair point. I do want to thank Mr. Rutledge because he has actually been offering direct answers to the questions. And so if you've ultimately got 1% net equity in your house, and house prices go back just to 2020 levels. So we're just talking going back to where they were a couple of years ago, and they've dropped by 25% then. You're 24 percentage points underwater in your mortgage. Now, if you can't make your mortgage payments because you're on a variable rate, you've just acknowledged that half of new mortgages are variable, and you default, then you hand your house over to the bank in a 24% loss position, and the bank hands the bill over to Ms. Bowers over at Cmhc, who then passes it on to taxpayers in the form of mortgage insurance payment. That is the risk that we're facing now. I want to know what immediate action, Mr. Rutledge, you're taking
Mr.
to address the high level of variable rate mortgages.
We have gone well over your time, Mr. Poilievre. Monsieur Giroux and Monsieur Blakey, we are moving to the Conservatives, and Mr. Poilievre, you've got the floor for 5 minutes. I think you're on mute, Mr. Poilievre.
Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Giroux, thank you for coming. You've recently published a report in which you chronicled $542 billion of government spending measures, almost a third of which is not part of the COVID-19 response plan. So how much in new additional measures has the government enacted in the last 2 years or since the COVID crisis began that is unrelated to COVID-19?
So my estimate is about $176 billion, give or take $1 billion or $2 billion. That is not directly related to COVID-19.
Since which start date?
Since the start of the pandemic.
Since the start of the pandemic, the government has enacted over $176 billion of new spending measures that have nothing to do with COVID. You have said that the government has government's own guardrails, which it has set in place, have now been reached, and that there is no longer justification for a new $100 billion of additional spending. The chief economist for Scotiabank came to our committee last week, and he said that all things being equal, additional deficit spending would contribute to inflation. Do you agree with him on that?
I agree with him if the additional spending is not to increase the productive capacity of the Canadian economy. So if it's purely to stimulate demand, it does indeed create inflationary pressures.
So deficits can contribute to inflation?
Yes, they can.
And could $100 billion of additional deficit spending measures potentially contribute to inflation?
again, if they're not destined to increase the productive capacity of the economy, they can create inflationary pressures.
Because they create, in that case, more demand without meeting it with new supply.
Exactly. So they create more demand in an economy that's already running close to or at full capacity.
Right. And obviously that capacity is quite weak, but it is the fact that we have such a weak economy and we're considering it to be at full capacity is really quite a depressing story. More dollars chasing fewer goods always leads to higher prices. Some are even calling that just inflation. And I won't ask you to comment on that because I know that that's not necessarily in your report. But do you believe that we can continue to go on adding new debt at this rate, or do you think that that it is advisable for us to get on a prudent path to reducing the debt to GDP ratio?
Well, I've said a couple of times that we could afford a deficit that was as high as the one in the last fiscal year, but we could not afford that many years in a row. So as deficits decline, that suggests that the fiscal situation will return to more sustainable levels of deficit. But it's clear that we could not have afforded the same level of deficit that we saw in 2020-21 for many years in a row.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have left?
Got 45 seconds.
45 seconds. All right. Mr. Parliamentary Budget Officer, we have had 85% housing inflation since the Prime Minister took office. When he came into office, the typical house went for $436,000. That typical price has risen to $811,000. Last year, we had all-time record housing inflation of 26%. Do you believe that the negative real interest rates on variable rate mortgages might be contributing to the demand that is ballooning these house prices?
Very short answer.
It is very clear that very low interest rates are fueling demand because most people don't buy a house paying in cash. They look at the monthly payment and they decide based on that what type of house they can afford. So lower interest rates mean lower, other things being equal, lower monthly payments, and lower rates mean that people can afford to spend more on a house. So yes, it is creating upward pressures on prices for housing.
Merci, Monsieur Poilievre. We are moving now to the Liberals and Ms. Zarowitz for 5 minutes.